It's not about increasing our faith. It's about doing the things that God has asked you to do. Stop asking for more. Stop asking not to do your duty. Hey everyone, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter. I am bringing you the Bible in 365 days. And today, I'm using the 1 year chronological Bible reading plan, which is available online, oneyearbibleonline.com, where you would download a free reading plan. Yes, listen, you can do it one of two ways. You can download a printable, or you can just click on a link every single day. They have a link every day of the reading that you would need to do. So it depends how computer savvy you are or want to be or whatever. I'm going to keep it real with you that last video I did this exact same thing. I had to re-record because it was 47 minutes. And if this one isn't much shorter, then I might just use the long one. So we're going to say, but today our reading we're on day 293. It is October 19th. And our reading is Luke 14:25 through 17:10. And John 11:1 through 37. There's literally so much reading in here, and I want to just make sure I do it justice. So I got to cut some other things shorter. I can't go off on any tangents. So here is your history. For those of you who have never been with me before, you are going to stay for the next 2 minutes because it's important to start here before we end up where we are. But if you've been, fast forward through the next 2 minutes, hit me up at about 3:30. I'll be done. 3 minutes and 30 seconds-ish, give or take. God made the world. He is a supernatural being. There are supernatural beings in areas in which we can't see, but they are there. God can see us. He knows who we are. He has created us. He created the entire world and everything that is in this world. He created the entire universe, and he created humans to be in relationship with him. So he created the earth, right? The heavens, the earth, all that's in it. And then he created this beautiful little area in heaven, on earth, and it was called the Garden of Eden. And then he created us in that garden, right? Actually, he created us and then put us in that garden. And he said, I'm also going to put this tree in there that has the knowledge of good and evil. And I don't want you to eat from that tree, whether that be a test or whether it just be something. I mean, I feel like it had to be a test to see whether they would or wouldn't stumble in this area. A serpent came in and he kind of coaxed them into taking the fruit, and they did. Eve ate it first, gave it to Adam. And since that time, God has been sending messiahs to save these people in order to bring them back in relationship with him. Because that's the most important thing, is that we are in relationship with the Lord. That is what good is good. Being away from him is not good. It's death. Being with him is life, and it is all good, even if it doesn't feel good at the time. But the reality is we are now in bodies that have the knowledge of good and evil, and we can't always tell them apart. And so in his plan, he decided he needed to send a Messiah that was going to be him, because all these human messiahs that he was sending were saving the people, but they weren't doing the things that they were supposed to do. They weren't turning back. They weren't recognizing the Lord. And so he sent his son via a human. So a human woman had a son, a human son who was both fully human and fully God, and that is Jesus. And the Gospels that we are in, which are called the Gospels, the books that have been written, are proving that Jesus is the Lord, the Messiah that has been sent, and he is both the Son of God and he is God, which is a big ask. It's a big proof. And so they're spending all of these times doing that. What we're learning so far from Jesus is, again, he was born from a woman, but he has been doing miracle after miracle after miracle. He continually says that God is his father and that he gets all of his information as the son and then shares it with the people. He's been doing all these miracles in order to turn people to him so he can point them to the Lord. That's where we find ourselves today. So he is in large crowds. He has been in Jerusalem, and he's gone up and down the entire nation of Israel. And he's been teaching and he's been doing miracles. What we find him now is traveling with a large crowd. So he does these miracles, these things, and then people start following him because he heals them, or he shows compassion to them, or he preaches to them about what it means, right, to be who they are and what it means to follow him. And so people then start following Jesus everywhere he goes. He always has a bunch of people with him. So it says here in Luke 14, it says large crowds were traveling with Jesus, and turning to them, he says, If anyone comes to me and does not hate mother and father, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple. And then he goes on to say, whoever does not carry their cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. My disciple means somebody who follows him, right? If we were to just go with a basic, what is a disciple like in life, right? So we would comfortably understand that an electrician has a disciple that they have coming with them. They're teaching them while they're actively doing the things that they're supposed to be doing as an electrician, right? So they're learning the basics on the job, so to speak. And they're learning it with somebody who's older and significantly more skilled than they are, probably older, more skilled than they are in the position. And so that's what these followers are. They are people who are following him in his footsteps, doing the things that he did, listening to his teachings and following his teachings according to the Lord. So he says, if you come to me and you don't hate your father, mother, all your family, then you can't be my disciple, and even yourself. And now, how do we equate this with the same Jesus that said, love God and then love your neighbor as yourself? And then he says, who's my neighbor? And they say, this horrible Samaritan. So how do we equate that? He's just told us to love on our neighbor, and now he's saying you need to hate your family. So is he a hypocrite, or is there something in there that we're missing? And of course, I'm going to say there's something in there that we're missing. And I feel like this is the key piece right here. He says, yes, even your own life. So you need to hate even your own life in order to follow the Lord. And so what would that mean in the grand scheme of things? Does he mean be mean to your life? Does he mean take your own life because you hate your own life? Does he mean be miserable all the time? And I'm going to say, of course, that's not what it means. What it means is we need to follow him. And in order to follow him, we can't put anything in front of him. So you need to love less anything that is not Jesus. Anything that wants to draw you away from Jesus, you need to hate. So even these ideas of your own life, like we have these desires for ourselves that are sinful to the Lord, that are ways that we want to put ourselves first and Jesus last. And he says, you need to be willing to give all of that up in order to follow me. That's the way you need to follow me. And the truth is all his teachings are saying that. His teachings are saying, be humble. His teachings are saying, give all that you have, right? Those are his key teachings. His teachings are saying, give to people that can't give back to you. His teachings are saying, be shrewd and smart with all of your things. And so these are ways that will separate us from other people, because they're going to be like, you're crazy. Why would you do anything like that? And that's going to separate us, not even accounting for the fact of separating us from ourselves because we're giving up things that we want in order to follow him. Now, the second thing he says is whoever doesn't carry their cross can't be my disciple. And so I want to take back maybe taking back is the wrong word. Let me just go with what it says. So he hasn't gone to the cross yet. So I don't want to go forward in order to go back. So then what could he mean to the disciples at this time? Now, we can talk about what he means in the future, but at this time, what could he possibly be saying? And I believe that what he's saying is so those who would have gone to the cross would have been some of either the worst people or like people who have started against the government, right? Like, so people who have started like coups and tried to take over the government, political people, right? They would go to the cross. Seriously bad people would go to the cross. But when they prepare to go to the cross, quite often they would either be beaten or tortured before they go to the cross, but always they would have to carry their own cross. So they would have this huge, I'm telling you, as if you probably don't know what a cross looks like. It's this massive piece of wood and they're carrying it on their backs. And so it's extremely heavy. They are already wasting away in some ways, right? Like, so maybe they haven't fully eaten. They've been in jail probably, right? And jails aren't necessarily what they are now. I'm not saying they're good now. They were probably way worse then. And so jail wasn't the greatest of things. Usually they were like underground in chains, not really being fed too much, not being able to go to the bathroom too much. And so it wasn't the best place to be. And so they were already emaciated. They weren't eating, they weren't drinking, they weren't being taken care of. They had probably been beaten or hurt before they came out here, and they needed to carry this own cross. So physically, that's a lot of suffering. Number one. So that means for us, if we need to carry our own cross, we need to go through some physical there's a high probability we're going to have to go through some physical suffering in order to follow Jesus. The other side of carrying your own cross is everyone who carried their own cross knew where they were going. They knew death was coming. You're at this point, you are not getting out of it. So you're carrying your own means of torture and death, because being executed on a cross was not even like it is now, which is already awful. But being executed on a cross is long, brutal, extremely painful, right? You running out of breath. It's a horrible process. And so emotionally, you're dragging your instrument of death to the location where you're going to be tortured and die. So the role that plays in your suffering would be mental anguish. So he's saying, I believe, you're going to be mentally tortured and you're going to be physically tortured in order to be my disciple. So those are the things that there's a very high probability that you are going to go through. You need to be willing to go through those things in order to follow me. It is not going to be all roses and flowers and beautiful things and amazing stuff. That's probably most likely not what it's going to look like to be a follower of Christ. Now, in some places and in some ways, it is much easier than others. But we should all be aware that there is a price to pay. And it could be friends, family, loved ones. It could be something in our own life. It could actually be our own life. And it could be mentally, where we're going to be suffering in a very extreme way. And so those are the things that he's requiring in order to follow him. And then he says, this next section is talking about preparing them. So I'm just going to read really quickly. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower. Won't you sit down first and estimate the cost to see if you have enough money to complete it? So I think I may have told the story before, but I'm not too sure. I'm a fitness instructor, which I know I've definitely told before, and I teach the spin class, and I like to push really, really hard. I find myself to be a pretty challenging instructor, which is something I like, and that's something I've always kind of thrived on. But when I have these moments where I want to, like, what I say, I want to beat them up really bad. And I like to prepare them in advance. So I like to let them know. So I'll say something like this, and it doesn't come out really nice, but I'll say something like this: take your break now, because next song is going to be brutal, right? With next 30 seconds that are coming up should be agony. That's what it should feel like. So I prepare them. Now, some might be like, why are you just do it? I don't want to be prepared. You're making me nervous now that I'm going to be prepared. But what I want them to do is I want them to give me everything that they have. And if they know the amount of time and the scale of 1 to 10 of what I'm asking them, I feel like they're prepared, and then they can offer that to me. If I don't tell them and they're like, holy moly, this is really hard, how long is this going to last? I don't necessarily think they're going to give me everything that I want them to give me. So I want them to have the plans sitting in front of them before they offer me themselves. This is what Jesus is saying to them. He's saying, I'm telling you right now, this is going to be likely what it looks like. And maybe he's given them worst case scenario, right? Because again, I'm going to say that's not true for all of us. I'm not daily in mental, emotional, or physical anguish. There have been moments, but not daily. And so, but I need to be willing to give that. I need to understand that could happen. There are people who live in other countries who are not allowed to worship the Lord. If they go to one of the rivers to get baptized, there's a chance they're not going home. And so he's preparing them that there is a very distinct possibility that this is going to happen. And I want you to know the cost, because this is why I want you to know the cost. He said, because if those of you who don't give up everything, you can't be my disciples, right? Salt is good. If it loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's fit neither for soil nor for the manure pallets thrown out. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. So he says, if you, and this is what I'm going to picture this. If you say, I'm in, and again, I feel like I'm always going back to those soils. If you say, I'm in, and then this hardship comes, and you're like, whoa, I thought it was going to be all good. Like you said, the meek were going to inherit the earth. I'm not inheriting the earth. these people are trying to come out into my house and take my life. These people are taking my job away because I follow Christ instead of following the God of Israel, which it's the same thing. I just want to be clear, but they would have found that distinction then. And so if you're not prepared, there's a very good chance that you could lose your saltiness. And if you lose your saltiness, which is the second portion of this, you can't get it back. And this is one of those areas where I don't want to say I have a hard time or a struggle or whatever, but it really makes me think about it. Like those people who are in full deconstruction and who were like, I was serving in my church. I was in for 30 years. And then like people kept putting these questions to me. And I was like, you know what? That sounds like a horrible God. Maybe there's a chance that their saltiness will never come back. Maybe it's like when the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart because Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Maybe when the Lord hardened his heart, he wasn't able to come back then. Like maybe that time where he was like, well, maybe I'll let them go. The Lord was like, nope, my plan is now set in motion, right? You have given up what is good. And so now you can't get what is good. And so just a warning to you. And I feel like that's what Jesus has given. He's given them a warning, like letting you know you need to be prepared for what you're giving because there are going to be days where it is unbearable. And then there might be days where it's really, really good, but there might be months and weeks and years where it's just, it's all that you can just to exist. And will you stay with me or won't you? Are you prepared to be with me or aren't you? Because these are the requirements that it takes to follow me. Moving down here, and I think this in some ways follows along, right? So some people start to get lost. Right. So like if it loses its saltiness and then if we see and we're like, oh my gosh, what happened to that person? Right. This is, I feel like what these things are talking about. Lost sheep, lost coin, lost son. Right. These are the next three things. I'm going to quickly do the lost sheep and the lost coin. You have sheep in your gate and you notice one is gone. And you're like, oh my gosh, I'm missing a sheep. Are you just going to go, who cares? Of course you're not going to say who cares. These are, at the very least, this is providing you food. Right? At the most, this might be providing companionship. You might love your sheep, right? Like you have a relationship with them. And so at the very most, they might be providing relationship. And so you don't want to lose this sheep. And so you go, what the heck happened to this sheep? I'm going to go anywhere I can. I'm going to leave them. They're fine. They're in the pen. And I'm going to leave them and I'm going to go out and find my sheep. Lost coin, very same thing. You look in your pockets and you're like, oh my gosh, I lost $1. I know I had $1, but I can't seem to find where my dollar went. And so you go digging through your couch and through all of your stuff in order to find your dollar. And when you find your sheep and when you find your dollar, everyone rejoices. Oh my gosh. I mean, have you ever told anyone like your hands are in your pockets and you pull out a 5 and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot to put this in the pocket. And everyone around you is like, what a win. Like even it could be 25 cents. And we're so excited that you found that. Like, it's just such a win for you to have found money in your pocket. So everyone around you rejoices because what was lost is now found. And that's a really exciting thing. And it is the same way with the people who are starting to lose their saltiness, right? They start getting nervous. They start going, oh my gosh. And we start to see them drifting. And you're like, what's happening? These people are drifting. I have to go out and find them. I have to go spend time with them. This is what we're going to see with the lost son. So I want to go a little bit deeper into this story. Jesus says, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, give me the share of my estate. So he divided his property between them. And so I just want to start out with, this is the younger son. So he probably got less of the property, but the reality is he got some. When a father dies, that's when the stuff goes to the sons, or maybe when a father stops being able to take care of anything, it goes to the sons. But before it goes to the sons, it's still part of the property. So like, let's just say this guy had $100,000. So round figures, right? It was a rich guy, but let's just say he has $100,000. And the older son would have gotten 75,000 of that. The younger son, likely, right? The younger son would have gotten 25,000. So it was less than the older, but it was still money. And it was money that he didn't earn. He didn't do anything to have it. And so the father was like, you know what? Here, take this money. That's now $25,000 that the property no longer has. So the father now has less of his own money to work with, which we would go, oh, I guess maybe that's not, but the father looks ridiculous. The son doesn't want to work. The son doesn't want to be part of the family. The son just wants his money that he hasn't earned. And the father goes, Here you go. Because I love you, because you're my son. I'm going to give this to you anyway, even though you didn't deserve it, even though you kind of begrudge it, even though you want nothing to do with me. I'm going to give you this anyway. And then he goes out and he squanders it. Essentially just means he wastes it on things that are meaningless, prostitutes, bars, anything, gambling, right? Anything and everything that was not good for him. He wasted his money on, to the point where he's completely destitute. And he goes and he serves, he works for somebody else. He's so lowly that he's looking at the pig's food and he's like, I am so hungry. I would even eat this pig's food. And then he comes to his senses. So he's at this lowest of low point, no money left, no friends, no food, no nothing. And it clicks. If I went back home, my dad treats the servants. I was the son. My dad treats the servants better than this. I'm just going to go back and be a servant. This is where we see a little bit of his heart, because like for a lot of people, you might think to yourself, well, big deal. He loses all his money and then he goes back home to his dad who has money. But the reality is, he said he was willing to go back as a servant. So as something that was less than, he wasn't going to take his position as son again. He was just willing to go in there and be a lowly servant in his father's house. And so what he does is he winds up going there, and before he even gets there, and this is what's amazing about the Father, before he even gets there, the Father runs to him. The Father has never given up on him. He has never forgotten him. He holds no animosity towards him for holding on and squandering all of that money and going out and doing all those bad things. The Father loves that the lost son has returned home. He is rejoicing that the lost son has returned home. And when he comes back, he's like, everybody, we're having a huge party. We're killing the fattened calf. We're going to have this massive celebration because my son has come home. So he's just excited that his son has walked away from all of the things that are bad for him and walked towards the Father that loves him. But the brother is really frustrated. So the older brother says, meanwhile, in verse 25, the older son was in the field, and when he came near, he was like, hey, what's happening? And they're like, oh, your brother has come home. The lost son has come here. And so we're going to have a big party for him. The older brother in verse 28 becomes angry and refuses to go in. So his father goes out and pleads with him. So his father doesn't give up on the older son either. So this hard-hearted son who refuses to rejoice because his younger brother has come to his senses and come back home, the father goes out and pleads with him, come back in with us, celebrate with us. And he says, you never gave me a goat that I could celebrate with my friends. And the father says, my son, you are always with me. He calls him my son. You have always been here. You have always had everything that I had to give you. He said, but I had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now he's found. So I want to tell you that this is a push against the Pharisees, who are probably the older brother. And they're the ones listening to this, by the way. Everyone's listening, but they are also the ones listening to this. They're likely the older brother. And they're the ones who are like, we've been following all the rules. And then Jesus comes in and he lets in these gross tax collectors and sinners, right? Because earlier they said, oh, you're sitting with the tax collectors and sinners. And they're like, essentially, how dare he give to them? He should only be giving to us. We're the ones that followed all the rules. And the Lord is like, Jesus is like, welcome them in. Love on them like they are your brothers, right? We should be joyfully lifting anyone up. All these people who will come to you. So let's say a non-believer, and I hate to even go into this apologetics realm, but I'm going to jump in real quick. Say a non-believer comes to you and goes, oh, so what you're saying is you can do good stuff for your entire life. And just because you don't believe in Jesus, you're not going in heaven. But that person who has broken all of these laws, been in jail for 25 years, he claims to love the Lord and he's going to go to heaven. Yes. Yes. Because the truth of the matter is he is changing his life. He's turning away from all that is bad and turning toward all that is good. And we should celebrate that. What, you want him to stay in jail and be a horrible person for the rest of his life? Or do you want him to embrace the Lord and all that is good of the Lord, and then maybe draw other people to the Lord? You see, the Lord is the prize. And what you're saying is I want to hold people away from the prize. And you know what? Maybe I don't even want that prize, but I follow the rules all the time. That's not what it means to follow Jesus. It is not just about following the rules. It is not about doing the right thing according to what your standard of righteousness is. Even if it's the general standard of righteousness, it still doesn't matter. It's all about following the Lord. And those of us who follow the Lord should be able to and desire to celebrate anyone that wants to come in and follow the Lord. All right, moving down into this story of the shrewd manager. So he says, Jesus told his disciples, so he's still talking to the disciples, and I think Pharisees are there as well. There's a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So there's this rich guy, he's hired a manager. The manager he's not handling any of his possessions really well. So he's like, here's the deal, show me all your books, and then you're out. And the guy starts freaking out. Like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Like, I don't have another job to go to. I don't have anywhere to go. So he starts going to the rich man's customers, which is what he should have been doing in the first place. He starts going to the rich man's customers, and he's like, so what, you owe 400? All right, listen, we're going to take 20% off of that, and you're only going to owe me 360, and we're going to call all this even. And then he does that with all of the customers. And so all of the customers are joyful. They're happy. Oh my gosh, you gave us a discount? That's amazing. So he's hoping to have a place with them if he winds up losing his place. Well, he already did lose his place with this rich man. And so then the master commends him because he's acted shrewdly. And by the way, shrewdly means sharp power of judgment. So he's made some really good calls because he's now in some ways worried about his own skin. And so he's made these good judgment calls in order to make friends with these people. And so the friends will now want to do business with him because of the discounts he's given. So he says, the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than the people of the light. So you're more willing to give to the people of the world than you're willing to give to the people who follow God. He's like, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves. So when it's gone, you're going to be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Use your money in good ways, which is going to give you an eternal dwelling. He's been talking about this for a while, the use of your money and how you use it and how you love on people by offering discounts, by giving them certain things, by loving on them in financial ways. So if you have his desire is for you to share with those that do not. He said, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. And he's like, no one can serve two masters. So you can't serve God and money. If you're depending your whole life on this money, you're not depending on God. And so you need to spend your life depending on God. And then I was going to say the money will come, but it may or may not. But our reality is we're supposed to be depending on God. The Pharisees who loved money heard this, and they were all sneering. And Jesus said to them, you're the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your heart. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. God does not love or honor money. And that is mostly what says that they're valuing. He says the law and the prophets were proclaimed until John the Baptist. So all the way up to John the Baptist, the law and the prophets were proclaimed to the nation of Israel. They followed the law. They listened to the prophets. Well, they didn't listen to the prophets, but even now, like at this time, they had the stories of the prophets, and so they would read about the prophets. And he said, since that time, the good news of the kingdom of God is being preached, and everyone is forcing their way in. So now you need to be aware because everybody's coming. And by everybody, I think he means everybody. So some are the people of Israel. Some are not the people of Israel. And they're forcing their way in. They're not coming in, by the way, through the law and the prophets. It says it's easier for heaven and earth to disappear than for the least stroke of a pen to drop out of the law. It's written, I want to say terribly in this way. What it basically says is the law is still the law. Like it doesn't mean that they can, because this was to the nation of Israel, that they can ignore the law because other people are forcing their way into the kingdom. Follows up with anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Adultery is turning away from the Lord. This is not a random, like, oh, this is randomly talking about marriage. It's not. Do not forget the law. And it seems like Jesus is breaking the law, but he's really not. Do not forget the law. The Lord still honors the law through Jesus, right? Jesus was not, and it said, we read earlier, he was not here to break the law, to destroy the law. He was here to fulfill it. So they're still going by the law. They're still following that. Then he tells the story about a rich man and Lazarus. There was a rich man who dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was a beggar named Lazarus. He had sores and he couldn't eat, like he was just longing to eat like anything that the dogs left over. So he was starving and he was lowly and he was a beggar. When the time came, the beggar died and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. So right away, I think we see the difference here. So the angels carried Lazarus up to be near Abraham, and the rich man was buried. So life and death, right? Their human bodies both died. One went to life and one went to death. He went in Hades where he was in torment, but he sees Abraham and he calls him, Father Abraham, have pity on me. He's like, can you just give me the least little drop? Like, I'm dying down here. I feel like everything is on fire. I'm dying down here. Can you give me the least little drop? And he's like, I can't. He said, in your lifetime, you had all the great stuff. He didn't have any of the good stuff, but you had everything. And he's like, besides all this, between us, there's this great chasm. So I couldn't even get to you if I wanted to. He said, I beg you, Father, send for my family. Send Lazarus up to tell my family all that has happened. And he said, your family already has all the information. So did you, by the way. He had Moses and the prophets. Remember what he says? That nothing leaves Moses and the prophets. It's still there, right? Like that law is still there. He had all that. He should have known who Jesus was, by the way. But he had all of these things. And he said, that should have been enough. And the guy says, but if someone from the dead goes, they're going to repent. And he says, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. This obviously is something I want us to remember, right? This is a verse that we want to remember. But this is really important. If your heart is hardened and you're not listening to anything that you've been given, you're not going to listen to anything else that you've been given, right? So like if someone comes to you and says, well, what about this? But then what about this? But then what about this? I'm not saying don't answer them. Obviously, I think all that stuff is really important. I answer people whenever they ask me questions. But there is some truth to the fact that like they're probably not really asking because they want to listen. Their hearts are hardened towards that, especially if you can tell that their attitudes are hardened. Their hearts are hardened towards that. So they're not going to listen no matter what trick that you do. And I always thought, like, if I just say it like this, or maybe I need to explain it like that. Well, this person is a machinist, and so maybe I can explain it in language they'll understand. Oh, this person is right, like so. Or if I come, maybe I need to be more harsh. Maybe I need to be less harsh. And the truth is yes, that we are supposed to lovingly transfer this information in any way possible. So I don't want to take any of that away from anybody. But that does not mean the person's going to listen. Because if someone's heart is hardened, their heart is hardened. And no matter what comes through, it doesn't matter. Until they come to their senses, like the lost son, they're going to be stuck in that same place. Yeah, he moves through teachings about faith, forgiveness and faith. He says, Jesus says to his disciples, things that cause people to stumble are bound to come, but woe to anyone through who they come. So don't be the person who makes other people stumble. If you are a follower, you shouldn't be doing anything to cause stumbling for someone else. You should be continuing to forgive. If someone sins against you, rebuke them. It doesn't mean don't say anything. It doesn't mean let everything go. Rebuke them, turn them back to the Lord, but forgive them. If they seek repentance, forgive them. I don't care if they do it 1,000 times. If they seek repentance, it's time for you to forgive them. And then the apostles are like, increase our faith, which I think means essentially like, this is too hard. We can't do this. And he's like, so he tells the story because he says, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you're going to be able to do this. But he says, suppose one of you has a servant plowing or looking after the sheep. Is he going to say to this servant, hey, when you come in, let me feed you? No, the servant's going to still have to come in and do all the other things that he's supposed to do. And the person that hires him is going to eat. And then after the servant has done all his work, then he can eat and do all the things that he desires to do. It's the same for you, right? And he says, you should say, we are unworthy servants. We have only done our duty. So it's not about increasing our faith. It's about doing the things that God has asked you to do. Stop asking for more. Stop asking not to do your duty. Your duty is to, sound it so immature, is to repent and to forgive. That's your job. Now, we're moving on to John 11. This is our last section here. So thank you for being patient with me so far. Hopefully, I'm going to be just a couple more minutes. A man named Lazarus was sick, and he is the brother of Mary and Martha. Mary and Martha, we've seen twice already. Mary and Martha are the sisters. Martha was cleaning up the house when Jesus was there, and Mary was sitting at Martha's feet. And Martha was like, Jesus, tell her to get up and help me. And he says, she's doing the right thing. So he was the brother of these two sisters. And then she was also the one who was perfumed him and was cleaning his feet with her hair. So he has a relatively close relationship with these three. And it says, the one that you love is sick, who is Lazarus. They're far away. So they had to send people to Jesus to go tell him this because they're at a distance. And they're down in Judea. And he says, when he heard this, he says, so he said to probably the people who were giving messages back and forth, this sickness won't end in death. It's for God's glory, so that God's son, who is Jesus, may be glorified through this. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days, which literally makes the opposite of sense, right? He's like, he loved both of them. So he stays 2 more days away from Lazarus, who's sick and dying. Why wouldn't he have just gone immediately? Well, he tells you why. So God can be glorified and the Son can be glorified through the Father. So right now there is a purpose for Lazarus being sick. This is someone who Jesus loves, who, quite honestly, like, you don't want him to die. Like, he loved him. He doesn't want him to die. He doesn't want him to lose his life on earth. It's devastating. The people in his family will be devastated. But he does so the Lord can be glorified. So he has a purpose. And then he says to his disciples, all right, let's go back to Judah. But he says, Rabbi, they were trying to stone you there. Are you going to go back? And he says, we can go back. There's hours of daylight. We can definitely go in there and do the things that we need to do. He said they have no light, so he doesn't seem to be worried about anyone that's there. And then Thomas is like, let's go. We're going to go die with him. So he's like, we're essentially like, wherever you go, we're going to go. If that means we need to die with you, then we need to die with you. And then they say, he says, Lazarus is asleep. And they were like, well, if he's asleep, he's going to get better, right? And he was like, oh, well, he's really dead. So he kind of lets them know. They didn't understand. And I think he keeps using that expression purposely in order to help them start understanding what he means by that. So he goes there. And then it says, when Martha heard Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha says, if you'd been here, our brother would not have died. But I know God's going to give you whatever you ask. And he says, your brother's going to rise. And she said, I know he's going to rise in the resurrection. And he said, whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she says, yes, I know you're the Messiah. I know that you do all these things. And then after this, she goes back to her sister and brings her sister back and says, the teacher's calling for you. And so she goes out there. And of course, Mary is just Mary. I feel like Mary has so much emotion. So Mary's just Mary. And it says, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and also said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was moved in spirit and troubled. I think he was troubled because of his love for her. I think he just loved her, and he was so sad that she was so sad. She said, come and see, Lord. And then Jesus cried. So like Jesus was weeping. And here we go again with showing his humanity, how great and loving he is, that he is suffering with her suffering. Even though we're going to see what he does, but he's suffering with her. He's troubled. Some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So people around are like, I know he's done some miraculous stuff. Couldn't he have prevented this? And that's how we end today. Like, that's the end of today's, I feel like it's smack in the middle of the story, which feels kind of weird. But if you, it's long, I'm going to finish quick. So if you found this to be a blessing, like, share, and subscribe. Keep reading, and we will finish the story up tomorrow.